So we're going to get started here. It's wonderful to be together. Welcome. I'm Lally Lloyd, Director of All Our Children. I want you all to know about our upcoming national conference that's happening in Columbia, South Carolina in the middle of next month, well, the month after, in the middle of January. January 16 to 18, All Our Children, the Church's Role in Education Equity. We're going to be together for 2.5 amazing days and of celebration and connection and learning. I'll say a little bit more about this at the end of our webinar, but you can learn more about this conference at aoc2018.org. Welcome to this month's webinar, which is being recorded. We're so glad to have everyone here with us. This is going to be an interactive panel discussion about best practices for building your church's talents and resources by learning about and working with other local organizations and congregations to support and grow your local church partnership. We have, after some introductions, our panelists and I will have a conversation, and then we'll take some questions from our participants. We'll wrap up with an evaluation and a survey promptly at 3:45. Mary Liz Murray, our Director of Communications, will be monitoring our chat board. Mary Liz, will you explain how that chat function works? I'm not hearing you.
Yes.
There you are.
Yeah. Thanks, Lally. So for everyone who has joined us on the call, your chat function can be found by scrolling over your video screen and watching the bottom toolbar pop up. There are icons there, and one of them says chat. If you click that open, it should pop up on the right side of your monitor, Zoom webinar chat. Then there's a typing box toward the bottom of the screen. If you can, please keep your chat questions to the all panelists and attendees option. This will make it so that the other people listening in can follow up on your question if they have a resource to share or an answer, and it means that everybody can follow the conversation. If you're having a technical difficulty or you have a private question, you can chat with me directly by choosing me from the drop-down menu. I'm Mary Liz Murray, and I'll be in there asking some questions and available to triage your questions for our Q&A at the end of the call.
Great, thanks. I'm going to open us with a word of prayer. So will you join me? Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the gift of all our children and for the gift that is each child, bearing a beam of hope to the world, manifesting a unique face of our common humanity. Our world cannot be well until the most vulnerable are well, O Lord. Equip us to fight for justice for all the children. Grant us your spirit of wisdom and insight, that we may be co-creators with you, teaching our children well, nurturing, challenging, and guiding them. Bless our teachers, schools, and parents, and challenge and equip us to give to every school everything every child needs to thrive, so no child's gifts, talents, or potential would be squandered. We thank you for the privilege of laboring for the children to the glory of your name. Amen. All Our Children as a network, our mission is to build the movement for education justice. And we do this by supporting congregations and their members who are exploring, forming, and leading community partnerships with public schools. And we do this because too many children, most of them living in poverty and many of them children of color, receive a substandard education. And we don't think that this is God's dream. We believe that Jesus showed the church how to engage our communities, our neighbors, to serve children, and to challenge injustice. And we know it is God's dream that every child grow into the fullness for which she was created. To learn more about our work as a network and our vision, you can visit us at allourchildren.org. So today's webinar, our topic is building on local resources to support successful partnerships. You don't have to do it alone. Building a partnership with a public school is both rewarding and complex. Even once you've found the right team in your congregation, it can be challenging to discern the best way forward, to rally the resources you need to face obstacles, and to find meaningful ways to serve students that is helpful and sustainable for both the congregation and the school. But the good news is that there are people in your community and in our network and in the wider world who can help you, and we're privileged to have 3 of them with us here this afternoon. Today's panelists are Rebecca Larson-Bean, the coordinator of the Dillard Middle School Partnership Project, which is a collaborative partnership of 2 and an emerging 3rd Episcopal congregation in the Goldsboro, North Carolina vicinity. Ansel Sanders, President and CEO of Public Education Partners in Greenville, South Carolina. And Tamara Plummer, Asset Map Coordinator with Episcopal Relief Development in New York. It's good to have all 3 of you with us. Thank you. Rebecca, will you start, please, and introduce yourself? Say a little bit, your name and your title, and a sentence or 2 about your organization and what you do.
Sure. My name is Rebecca Bean, and I'm a deacon, and I serve, my home base is St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Goldsboro. I also work with, in different capacities, 2 other Episcopal churches in our area, St. Stephen's and St. Francis, and I coordinate the Dillard Middle School Partnership Project, where we work with a local inner city middle school that's very close to all 3 churches, and partner with them in all kinds of ways and try to become a better community all around. So,
thank you. Ansel.
Sure. Thank you, Lolly, and thank you for this opportunity this afternoon. My name is Ansel Sanders, and as Lolly said, I'm president and CEO of an organization called Public Education Partners here in Greenville, South Carolina. We've been around since 1985, and we're actually born out of the business community here. Our role and function is to really be that kind of bridge and broker between the public education sector and the community at large, rallying the community for advocacy purposes through grassroots organizing, as well as essentially being the vessel through which the community can invest its time, treasure, and talent into initiatives that research shows works in our schools. And so we're the kind of the platform and the partner with our public schools where we can introduce those innovations.
Great. Wonderful. Tamara.
Hello, my name is Tamara Plummer. I'm the Asset Map Coordinator at Episcopal Relief and Development. Episcopal Relief and Development is the nonprofit arm of the Episcopal Church. Our work is to respond to the needs of our most vulnerable neighbors, and particularly after disaster in the United States. And internationally, we work in about 40 countries, and we believe in an asset-based approach to all of our work. So how do we utilize and leverage the gifts of a community to respond to the needs of that community? In particular, I work on something called the Episcopal Asset Map, which is kind of our asset-based collection database for the Episcopal Church, where we celebrate the ways that Episcopalians are engaging and living Christ's life in the world. And so my job is to motivate and inspire people to tell their stories on this digital platform. And All Our Children actually is one of the networks that you can find on that network. So that's a little bit about what I do and who I am.
Wonderful. Thank you. And let's staying with you for now, Tamara. What would you say what would you say would be an effective method or a process that you've seen for inviting people in a congregation to identify the range of assets and resources that they can tap into to build their local partnerships? And I know your work with the Asset Map does not focus particularly on church-school partnerships, But the question, I imagine, applies no matter what the missional, whatever the purpose of the missional outreach of a congregation is. It's still about finding the assets in the community and building relationships.
Yeah, we often, the way I'd like to think about this is the 5 Ps. It's called people, purse, posture, property, and programs. So who are the people in your congregation? What do they have gifts for? What do they enjoy doing? The property, what kind of space do you have? What's in your neighborhood? I like to think about it as parish in the traditional sense, meaning the neighborhood. So what are the resources in your neighborhood that you might be in relationship with? Property, so we did people, property, purse. Do you have money? You may not have a lot, but do you have any? Do you not have any? Do you know someone who can give you money? So kind of logging that. And then programs, what things are you already doing? So you may already be doing a nursery school. You may already have someone renting your space that does a tutoring program. You may have a teachers union that meets in your basement. What are the organizational things that are happening in the life of the church or your congregation already before you even start to have a relationship outside of it? And then the last one, I think, is the key to all of this work, and that's posture. I often hear a lot of church folks say they just want young families. And as soon as a child comes into that space and the child cries during the service, everybody wants the child to leave the service. That congregation probably does not have a posture for children. So you should definitely know if the inclination and the love of your church is leaning towards that partnership before you engage it, because that will always be more destructive than writing a check. So what is the posture in the movement? If there is some life and some love around engaging with the community, I think schools are the perfect place. Many of us have them all over the place. So after you've said, hey, what do we have as gifts? Where's that posture? All that. Then you say, great, let's have small, winnable moments in engaging with that school that's across the street. And a church I just saw in San Diego, actually, the way they started doing their school community partnership is that the school needed some space to rent because they're under renovation. And so they did not seek out a relationship with this school, but the school was across the street. They needed a room. They had a room. They offered the room. So it can be very simple, and then you can build upon that over time.
Thank you for that. Rebecca, picking up on some of the points that Tamara just shared, or your own experience in building this community partnership, what was of what Tamara was just saying, what resonated with you, or what would you add to this question about what's an effective way to invite a congregation to identify ways of connecting with their partnerships?
Well, in our case, our ministry began in one church, and I think the biggest thing that I heard her say that resonates with me was connecting with the things that the congregation is already doing, because there are so many ways that we can connect with a school in the ministries that people are already excited about, whether that's things that they do outside of the church or within it. You know, we have different groups in the church that already do a lot of outreach and service projects. So sometimes all it takes is saying, you know, we have this need at Dillard Middle School, or we collect things for Thanksgiving baskets. Now we can connect with the social worker at the school to target those toward the families that are there, or those types of things. We have a guild that does an outreach project every year, and so they've helped buy furniture for the library, for example. So there are lots of things that are already happening that can get people excited when we start connecting those things in the church, and builds some momentum too, and some ownership and some buy-in of that being a bigger project and a bigger part of the church's life.
And so what are you seeing from your perspective, sort of in the wider sphere, perhaps? I mean, you're locally situated in one town, but you're connecting across a lot of different sectors.
Yeah. One thing that really resonated with me, I love the 5 Ps. One thing we do as educators is we beg, borrow, and steal. So that's
right.
one of them right off the bat that I'm just going to pluck. So I appreciate that. There's another P, pluck. I like the parish kind of framing that you talked about, and the real example of kind of the school that's in proximity to the church. And I often see examples, both locally here and in other communities, that you're able to leverage kind of the assets that exist in the congregation of the church, but oftentimes that feels when you connect those assets to the local school that may very well be across the street, sometimes it feels like it's more a doing to than a doing with, and all of that is right in a sense, and there's a sense of urgency. We have these assets, we have these resources that we want to do right by kids and do right by schools as well. But one of the most effective, I think, methods or strategies is to invite the principal to come speak to either the congregation as a whole or some type of Sunday school setting, and the principal can really articulate kind of the his or her hopes and fears, some of the biggest challenges that are both academic and non-academic in nature that kids are facing, that are impediments to their ultimate growth and development. And I've found that when those both assets and barriers that the principal identifies are brought into the context of the church, you see a ton of through lines and kind of fibers that are built. And I'm really thinking of a great example here between Carolina High School and Westminster Presbyterian right here in Greenville. And the principal was able to tell his story of Carolina High, and almost organically you saw opportunities to connect capacities and assets available within the church to the assets, capacities, and challenges that through, quite frankly, storytelling really emerged. So that idea of the parish in the sense of it being the community, and walking across the street, and the principal walking across the street and getting in front of the church on Sunday, I think is a really telling example that stuck with me.
Can I add one thing to that?
Of course.
Sorry. The only thing I wanted to add to Ansel, what I like about that is that also the school, to be reminded that the school or the person that you're partnering with has gifts and assets too.
Yeah.
And that those gifts and assets you're not there to transform the school, but that you are building the partnership with the school, and that both of you will be transformed by that experience. So I wanted to just highlight that. I appreciated that.
Yeah. Thank you. Rebecca, let's pick up on that theme with you. How long have your congregations been in relationship with Dillard?
About 7 years now. We've been working with Dillard in different capacities. We started just by kind of showing up and talking to the principal and learning about the school a little bit more. And then as we learned more about the school, and we did invite the principal and the assistant principal into the church as well, and started growing the program from there. And it's changed a lot over the years into things that not at all what we expected when we started, but it's been really good.
So say some more about that. Like what did you think it would be when you started, and where are you finding yourselves now?
I guess I imagined we would have a lot of volunteers going into tutor and things like that. And we would do some of the things that we do, which is, helping with purchasing supplies and doing things like that. But we have our most recent project has been, for the last 2 years, we've had a girls mentoring group that we've met weekly at the school. And that really developed from the desire for people to volunteer, but not feeling confident in a one-on-one tutoring situation. And so finding a way for us to connect the gifts and talents of people who were really interested in doing the work, but didn't feel like maybe they were prepared in those other ways, having a group of people doing that consistently and with a consistent group of students as well has really been a huge, a boost to the morale and everything around our program, focusing more on doing some things in the school and being present in the school beyond just myself and a couple of other people. So we started with a clothing closet because that's what the principal expressed as a need. Now we don't even do that anymore because it's not been a need. We work with the guidance counselor and the social worker to meet individual students' needs as they arise if they can't be met in other ways. So I think key to us has been being present in the school and being aware of what is happening and what our projects are and aren't doing, and being willing to change course and think about where we really connect and building relationships with the people that are there and that can tell us those things and give us that kind of information.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of mutual transformation have you seen? So this was one of the points that Tamara was making also, that it's not that the people we are getting to know in our schools have gifts that we need and that we can benefit from and that can nourish and transform us individually and as a community. Have you seen that in the congregations involved?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing for me is especially in one of our congregations that we work with, they both are technically located in the school district where we serve, but most of those children go to private schools or go to school elsewhere, or they don't live in that area but go to church there. So seeing the congregation take more, ownership's not the right word because they're children, but just have a more active interest in what's happening in the community schools and being aware and taking note of things they see in the newspaper and bringing in articles to post. And these are our children, and really seeing the whole community as our children has been really, has been a special thing to see. And watching folks be involved in ways that they weren't sure. Be going into an inner city middle school can be intimidating for a lot of people, and a lot of people start projects with other grade levels for that reason. And so to see that happen at the middle school and to see people, almost everyone who's been in the school and actually gone in, to say, wow, it was a great experience, and the relationships that they're seeing and the behavior of the children and all of those things, and seeing that it's not always what we assume that we're going to find, I think has been one of the biggest things that I've seen.
Thank you for that. Let's see. Ansel, to you, what suggestions would you have for congregations that want to get better at being a partner in their wider community? So some congregations end up being pretty isolated and internally oriented and self-referential. From what you can see in your work there, do you have examples of experiences that you've observed or suggestions of how congregations can turn a little bit more outward? Is it a question of who they talk to, or how do they get started?
Yeah. I mean, I think it should be initially recognized that partnership kind of sounds easy in theory, but it's harder in practice. I mean, goodness, you can apply that to any kind of partnership, personal or professional, church and school, marriage, whatever. It takes some work, right? And in a lot of cases, there are entities actually who that are local, and I would say are in most communities that can operate almost as an intermediary to facilitate that type of partnership and ensure that conditions are created on kind of both ends of the partnership for it to take some root and build some trust and be mutually beneficial ultimately to young kids and schools. And so this idea of identifying the intermediary, I think, is an important task for a church to consider, especially one that has historically kind of operated in isolation and hasn't had much of a history in partnership. So an intermediary could take the form of, an entity like us, public ed partners. There are entities like us across the country in many communities, but it can also take the form of even somebody in civic government, city government, county government. It can take the form of somebody at the YMCA. It can take the form of the United Way, for example. So I think there are these bridge and broker intermediary organizations that may look and feel a little bit different in different communities, but can be tapped into almost as kind of a precursor to partnership, or an intermediary that can help facilitate making introductions to putting together some of those conditions that make partnership very, very effective. Here in Greenville, you see a number of those types of entities, and I'd encourage any church to think about who can help usher that partnership through, as opposed to feeling like they have to go it alone, where they may not have the capacity to do that.
So would that be something like a lot of towns have a local education foundation, for example, or a local education fund?
Yeah.
Some of those are equipped and able to be this kind of intermediary, but it's worth checking in with them, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's a really good idea. I mean, LEFs, local ed funds or foundations, which that's who we are here in Greenville, oftentimes have kind of relationships and an understanding with schools and kind of the school system, and can understand how to navigate the ins and outs of a singular school or school system that could help a church, for example, find the most effective way to partner and to launch a partnership.
In the asset-based world, we call that the bridger. So that's the bridger. And so that could be an organization, but it could also be someone in your congregation that you don't know already has a relationship with this school or with the organizations that you want to bridge with. So it could be, third generation difference between somebody sitting in your congregation, and then the organization that you want to work with. They might work for the nonprofit. They might work for something else. So thinking about that, just not organizationally, but also human capacity in the actual place that you're organizing.
So I'm really interested in this conversation. I'm also trying to track where we are in our questions, and my brain's having a little bit of a difficult time but I guess so I want everybody to say more about everything. Let's see. So to be concrete, let's go to Rebecca and ask, what did this look like in the emergence of your partnership? Did you did you have a relationship that was the foundation that got started? Was there a bridger, either a person or sometimes it's a teacher who goes to the congregation, or all these. So how was it that those congregations began to turn outwards and establish this relationship with Dillard?
So our partnership was a little unique in that I was a middle school teacher for many years, and when I had my daughter, who's now 8, I was looking for other ways to engage, and had always kind of imagined ways that churches could be involved in schools. And since I already kind of had a feeling and a heart, I guess, for middle school children, I just figured out where our closest middle school was. And knowing the school system, had an idea of that we definitely could both benefit from a partnership that direction. So, I talked to the principal, and we just started being part of the school and inviting each other to be in each other's spaces. And it just kind of grew from there. So I guess in that sense, I was a bridge person. I didn't really have a relationship initially at the school, except that I had some knowledge of how the schools worked in the area, and kind of who to contact and where to go from there.
And Ansel, can you give any more specific examples about other local resources, I guess perhaps there in Greenville, that are part of this sort of ecology in your city of congregations and resources? And
Sure.
Yeah,
there's, even to the extent that collaborating with other churches is kind of a viable option. It's something I'd put out there. And it's local here in Greenville too. There's an entity called United Ministries here in Greenville that has some programmatic priorities to them, but ultimately I think is able to have the legitimacy it does and the credibility it does, and quite frankly the reach that it does, because you have kind of a whole kind of cross sector of denominations involved, both through volunteerism as well as through financial contributions, and you have in a kind of collective impact type of world, this entity plays a kind of a backbone convening type of entity where perhaps churches who don't have the knowledge or capacity about how to get engaged in partnership work or introduce different programs or get involved in systems level advocacy, for example, have a place where they can lend their voice to a more collective voice. And United Ministries is kind of a manifestation of a collection of local churches who have come together and are willing to work differently and together. So I think the lesson there, beyond just the real example, is that bridge and broker could actually be a fellow church, and by being in that same space, perhaps that also kind of lowers the stakes as well. And there's some connection, because hey, we're both churches, we both want to serve, we're both parts of communities, we're both kind of navigating this world of partnership together. So that's something I've seen here locally be fairly effective in terms of offering programs, supporting kids, supporting schools. And the other thing I'd add to this too is, beyond just programs, I think there's a collective voice in kind of the advocacy realm that can be really effectively leveraged. Churches, I think, have tremendous voice in policy issues related to equity. And so that's just another, beyond the program itself, which I think are incredibly valuable. There's an opportunity for systems level change, especially where you can hold hands with other churches. So I just want to put out there in terms of ways churches can actually partner together to help influence positive things ultimately for kids in schools.
I want to return to this question about advocacy that you raised in just a minute, but I want to just say a couple of words about a local partnership that my congregation is involved in. I live on Cape Cod in Massachusetts and have lived here for about 3 years or so. And 18 months ago, our congregation, St. Mary's Barnstable, just began a brand new relationship with a local elementary school. And Cape Cod, even though it's perceived as being the playground of the rich and famous, the people who live here year-round are a very wide spectrum of economic opportunity and diverse language groups and a lot of seasonal workers. So there's a lot of turnover and some housing and food insecurity in our community. And this first year, last spring was our pilot time. We had 5 people who were volunteering in the classroom, and that was how we decided to build a relationship, have small winnable victories. We figured if we could get 5 people into a classroom of a teacher who invited us in for 1 hour a week, we would begin to be able to get to know folks, the school and the teachers, and also the people at our congregation would have a sense of what that experience was. This fall, we have twice that many, so we've been able to double that. And now we're beginning to look to the next dimensions of our partnership. And the two that we can see are to reach out to other Episcopal churches on Cape Cod, because where our elementary school is in Hyannis, which is the biggest city on the Cape, and it's very centrally located. But the other thing would be to build relationships with other local congregations in Hyannis, so that these different ways we could organize horizontally, or we could organize sort of vertically in a certain sense. And by organize, I mean build relationships. That's what I'm talking about. So I can see some of what you're talking about. And there is a local education foundation, and I don't even yet know what they do. So we've got a lot of research and a lot of learning to do. Yeah. Let's see. So
can we pick up on that advocacy piece?
Yes. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I just wanted to nod a little bit to that conversation a bit. I think sometimes church folks really want to do I need to volunteer and be there. And if that is not your gift, if that is not the posture of your congregation or your place of worship, that that piece of getting people to show up at the city hall meeting, the folks that are willing to be the lawyer to fill out social service forms, for example. So after disasters, when I also work in the U.S. disaster program, so things like filling out forms, helping people how to translate and navigate systems, that those are not necessarily particular programs, but there are ways in which we might have a special gift that other people may not quite have, and be able to use that, and not just I get to work with kids in a classroom, but I get to make sure that their lives are better overall.
Yeah. Thank you for that, for both of you, bringing up advocacy from within all our children as a network. The reason that we encourage congregations to form these relationships with local schools is in order, as I said in my introduction, to build the movement for education equity. And we do, and it is our hypothesis, it's our belief that when we get to know the teachers in the classrooms and the children in the classroom and the families, and we see the circumstances of our neighbors, then under the guidance of our relationships with our neighbors, we have an opportunity to take effective and meaningful collective action. So for me personally, just having lots of church school partnerships is not the goal. It's to inform our hearts and our heads in order to motivate our hands to be doing collective action, but to be doing it from a place of relationship and not from a place of rescuing or solving other people's problems. Yeah. So Rebecca, you're nodding. Is this something? Are these conversations that come up there for you all?
Of course.
Yeah.
It's an interesting teaching opportunity for people in our congregations, that the types of programs that we might dream up are not always the types of things that are most beneficial or even wanted in a school, and trying to help people realize that we need to look at the assets and the things that are already in the strengths of the school that are already there. And being a part of that school community doesn't mean that we're going in to fix things, because obviously that's beyond the scope of what we're able to do or should desire to do. But it can be a challenge in, everybody wants to, give some poor little child school supplies at the beginning of school, and that's great. And we do some of that in working with the school and working with the people that can connect those resources. But I think the relationship piece is so important in helping people to truly understand what's happening in the schools. It's a unique place for me as a deacon, in that I can bring that into the church in a different way as a member of the clergy and as someone who preaches and that type of thing, and try to do that but having other people involved too and being a part of that and seeing the inequity. We're in as many places across our country, we're in a very segregated school system. And for people to really see that and to confront that and think about that in ways that they hadn't before, it can create challenges, but it also opens a lot of eyes and helps people to get more on board in changes that we might be able to make.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please, Danza.
On that, I just really appreciate the comments here. One concrete example of, I think, of advocacy is, and somebody, Molly, was maybe, actually, I don't know who said it, but they were talking about getting people to City Hall. And so affordable housing is a big issue here in Greenville, and it's really emerged. I mean, Greenville, South Carolina is booming right now. I mean, it's a booming community in many respects. The downtown has really built up and redeveloped over the past 15 years. It's on all kind of lists for travel magazines and all of these things, and some of the consequences of that kind of growth and economic vitality are some of these systemic challenges that perhaps bigger urban locations experience, things like affordable housing in the city. And the church community here, led by a couple of churches, have really kind of tagged this particular issue as really salient from an advocacy kind of stance, and have attempted to really build the knowledge of our community, not just within the congregation, but in other kind of vessels, about what affordable housing is, what it is not, and what does that look like in the context of Greenville, South Carolina, and then what can you do with your voice. And as a result, really beat the drum to the extent that I've never seen a city council meeting as packed as I did when the council voted on starting a housing trust with a few $1 million. That was a chunk of the surplus that the city experienced for last fiscal year, and that was a big win. I mean, trust me, it's unfortunately a drop in the bucket from what needs to happen, but it is the start, and it's a huge kind of symbolic win, and I think an advocacy role that can be attributed to the faith-based community rallying around a particularly salient issue that affected their own congregation and the health of the community. And that value proposition started with kind of a small number and had a snowball effect. And it's a pretty cool story of advocacy, really led by our faith-based community here in Greenville. One quick thing I'd add to that is, we talked about kind of ways churches, or who can be that broker kind of role, that intermediary, whether it's an individual or an entity. I think it's also an interesting thought or something to consider by a church about who plays kind of that role internally to the church. I mean, a lot of churches do have kind of community engagement or faith in the community type of role. Specifically, there is human capital and capacity associated with that role internally. And even if there's not, I mean, I think that if that is a priority, then kind of time and support should be given to, an individual or a collection of individuals within the church to really spearhead that. It's just like an internal capacity thing that churches should probably consider as they seek to engage in partnership for programs, partnership for advocacy. Just something I thought of, and before it left here, I wanted to share it.
Well, I feel like what you're saying, though, Ansel, really resonates with right now. What I've been running around is I'm working on curriculum for this evangelism stuff that we're doing in the church, and it's called, like what you said, Rebecca, like you build the relationship so that you just grow this love and this connection with your neighbor, and it overflows into many forms. So it can overflow into programs, it can overflow into attending a city hall meeting, it can overflow into a number of buckets. But if it's the centering of that loving relationship where you're recognizing the presence of God working in the community across the street, in the school, in the teachers, in the parents of those children, in the children themselves, that in that building of the loving relationship between each other, it garners the ability for the congregation to then put into practice and overflow that love into different forums.
So I'm loving this. I wonder if we can see how concrete we can get for our attendees, our participants who don't live in any of the cities where you all live, perhaps. And so people are, I'm imagining people are sitting like, instead of saying, so like, how do I get started? How do I find the local resource, the local organization in my community that will support us in doing this advocacy work and this equity work for other children. So we've mentioned some of them, but let's just see if we can summarize these. We've talked about local education funds or local education foundations. LEFs was the acronym that Ansel used. We've talked about the YMCA, which can sometimes be a broker. We've talked about the possibility of there being somebody in local government. So you would go looking for the advocate, right? You'd be reading your local paper, right? You'd talk to maybe your minister or other civic leaders and just say, who's active in this space, right? So help me sort of build this out, panelists. What other questions or what other places might our participants look if they're looking for resources for themselves? Rebecca? So,
interestingly, over the last couple of years, I've found a lot of connections in our through disaster relief. Our community was hard hit by Hurricane Matthew about a year ago. And through being at community meetings that they held to help people connect with resources, I became much more connected, and other people in my community, in our church community, became much more connected with other organizations that work with the same population, because as is often the case with natural disasters, of course, the most disadvantaged people are often the most severely affected. And the area where where our partnership takes place around Dillard Middle School was one of the hardest hit in our area. And so it allowed us to branch out a little bit and form more partnerships with organizations that are doing other types of work. And then our organization becomes a bridge for them in helping to connect with the school, because we already have relationships there. So I think it's helpful to remember that it's not only education-based organizations that are doing the types of work that can benefit schools, but there's a group in our area that's working to connect nonprofit organizations in general. There are other organizations doing things like that. So being aware, reading the newspaper, staying on the websites of the government organizations, city and county, those types of things have been instrumental in us staying aware and involved and being able to make the connections that can grow our partnership across other areas that we might not personally have the capacity to engage directly in, but we can certainly support in other ways.
So it sounds like one of the things you're talking about is almost sort of building out the civic space of your community, right? Showing up, participating, right. Responding to issues as they come up, and meeting the other leaders and the other people who are participating in that space. That's really helpful. Ansel, was there something that you would suggest?
Yeah, I'd love to build on Rebecca's point there. The other kind of strategy that I would encourage is almost to flip that and think about kind of an open space strategy where almost the church puts out kind of like an RFP in a way to about a particular, like for particular topics, whether that is education or housing, or, and we know all of these things are related, but to put out kind of a request for experts to come to, you know, a meal to learn about, you know, that particular topic or sector, and its kind of opportunities, challenge, and assets in the community that the church is and serves. So this idea of kind of putting it out there to the community to say, we're interested in this. If you have some level of expertise or knowledge about this, please come. And so there is a, I mean, it's almost, it's flipping a little bit what Rebecca said the other way, to say, you know, we should do some outreach ourselves and be active and read newspapers and attend meetings, but also at the same time, you know, put it out there. Say, we want to get involved. We're interested. We're excited. We're chomping at the bit, and we want to know who can help fill kind of our knowledge bucket of this particular topic. I think about it like an RFP. You know, put out this request for proposals, and people will respond. So, one church here locally did something called November Nights, where essentially they had these different topical areas throughout the month of November, where they had a meal, they had a dinner, and then a series of you know, just sessions around different topics led by community experts that both responded to their request and that they had connections to as well. So, you know, it wasn't purely organic. They had some folks that they wanted to target, but just another strategy to get to the same outcome that Rebecca was talking about.
Well, and those two different images are very complementary, right? I mean, they would be a fabulous, you know, way of mixing it up, and a congregation might do one, you know, and then move into the other. Tamara, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, I'm looking at one of the questions was about having the hard time connecting to the school.
Yeah.
And I think I'm a big believer in the informal options as well. So if you are in a very rural place that happens to be cold, a teacher would love a cup of coffee for free in the morning. So I think it can be even the small actions. Like, can you call up the school and say, hey, we'd like to offer free coffee. Churches know how to make coffee. That we got down, right? So so can we offer some free coffee for teachers on the way in? And what time is that? And get some volunteers to show up. I think I don't think it has to be like, we want to meet with the principal today, because the principal does not want to meet with you today. But if you can show up for coffee for a month, with free coffee once a week for a month, and then you say, hey, can we come by with like you can, I think if it comes to, too often we think of the big, we want to have a program that's going to do this and it's going to do that, and this is our proposal, and we want to talk to you about it. And it's nobody, like, I don't know about you, but I'm very busy at work. And so if somebody is coming to a school that is dealing with a number of issues, the last thing they want to do is have a proposal meeting with a congregation. But if there are these small ways that you can say, I have something to offer, do you need it? Do you want it? Then they might say, oh, we would love to. And, oh, can we do that? Like, how can we bounce back and forth? And then the last resource I was going to offer is there's a thing that you can Google called a prayer walk. So this is where you walk around your community kind of intentionally thinking about the needs of that community and also seeing the grace of God moving in that community. And so that might be another option for finding the Bridger community. So this is a very urban example, but in New York City, children can't take their phones into schools. And so they have these guys that are like locker people. So the kid gives a phone and they have these locker systems outside. There's like 200 children standing at a truck holding that with a guy that safely keeps their phone all day, right? That seems like a random thing, but being a resource like that outside of the school, or knowing the guy who does that thing, can be part of the process. Who do the kids buy their candy from before and after school? Where are they actually just kind of congregating when school is over? Like there's a way in which if you're walking around the community to see where the school children are going or coming from, that might also offer you another person to be in relationship with before you're able to actually get into the door of the school?
Yeah, we in our emerging understanding of best practice in church school partnerships, we emphasize a number of the points that you just made. One is that my desire to start a partnership with a local school does not create a to-do agenda for the principal. Right? It is nowhere on that principal's to-do list to make this smooth and easy for me. So if we want to build a relationship, then we are relational, and it means that we make an appointment and we are prepared to wait, or we're prepared for it to be rescheduled, or we understand that we are not the number one priority for that principal. But the second thing also goes back to what you said at the beginning, Tamara, and that is to do small winnable steps. So we under-promise and over-deliver, because in the beginning of these relationships, the most critical thing that we want to be developing is a sense of mutuality and trust. That if we say we'll do something, we'll follow through, and it won't be intrusive, and it will be respectful. In our context, and I wonder sometimes whether our country doesn't have these big regional differences. In the Northeast, there's a lot of suspicion about religion wanting to get into schools, and I think it's true in the Pacific Northwest as well. And I've heard a little bit about it happening sometimes in California. There are places that have been really badly burned by religious people wanting to come in and behave in ways that are disrespectful or harmful to children or families. And of course, it's the school's responsibility to protect the children. So we need to navigate that, and we need to be respectful of that. Tamara, I want to just return back to you again with a question, and I wonder, your scope is broader than church-school partnerships, but it is about helping congregations identify not only their assets, but the assets of the community with which they want to be in relationship. And I wonder, let's see, I guess my first question is, what are the characteristics, would you say, of effective partnerships? What are some things that they have in common when they are being mutually transformative, when they do have a stickiness to them, when they're valued by both sides, when, so are there some characteristics, some qualities that are consistent across those that you might speculate?
Probably many. The one that's sticking out to me now is I am engaged in this work because, if the because is anything other than, I believe that God is calling us to be in loving, liberating relationships with our neighbors, then you need to not be in partnership yet. I would say that from a religious side of the coin, that the best relationships are not about us and our ego, and it is about how do we engage in loving, liberating, life-transforming relationships with other people. And that we are open for the opportunity to be changed by that relationship. So the possibility, one, that the relationship will fail and they will reject us. Mm-hmm. The openness that if we engage in this relationship, we might have to change the way we do things in our community, because those kids might show up to church on Sunday. And those parents might actually like us. And so we might have to change how we do things. That if those two things if the centering is, I want to be in loving, liberating, life-giving relationship with my neighbor, then your relationship will almost always be great. And it might almost always fail. So that if you're just open to the Spirit moving you and not you moving the Spirit, if it is always, let us prayerfully think about how I am entering into this relationship. What is my intention? What is my goal of this relationship? And if the ego is ever there, you just gotta be like, okay, wait, hold on. Let me step back. And anytime I've seen people enter into I just want to know with curiosity, and I want to be present to, and I'm wondering about, then almost always, I don't know, this might be also for romantic relationships as well, that tends to be the ones that flourish. When it is, I have something and I want to give it to you, that I don't ever want to date that person. So, so how just being really mindful about why we're deciding to be in relationship with our neighbors and doing that internal work really grounded, and that the intention of going into relationship must always come from both directions. So it has to come from the pew and it has to come from the rector or the church leadership. But if both are not in agreement, then the internal stuff will often bleed into the external stuff. So if you're inside the house, the church is a hot mess, I would really fix that before we head outside. Those would be mine.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So we're going to turn now to Mary Liz and see if she has some questions for us from our participants. What do you got for us, Mary Liz?
So I think we have a person on the call with us who's also located in Goldsboro, Rebecca, and she says that their experience has been that the schools are very territorial and it's been very difficult for them to build relationships. And so if you have any specific tips for her about what you did when you were starting out and how long that process took, I think that could be helpful. And maybe if you're willing, I can connect you to offline so you can talk more specifically about your town.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to connect. I think that going in with an open mind and listening a lot to the, we went in and talked, we try to talk first to the principal, and we've been through 3 principals at this school now. And whenever a new one comes to do that too, and just kind of talk about the things that we can offer and what we've done in the past has been helpful, and also being willing to work with whoever the principal kind of assigns to work with us, and to go through that person, I think is also important. And I think it's true that schools often have a history of some difficult relationships in the past, and groups that come in to do something big and then don't follow through or can't be consistent. And so when you're working with someone who has that type of experience, it's really important to start small and to the small winnable things, as we've talked about before. Starting an after-school program was something that has been talked about among our congregations many times, and we've always ended up not going down that path because we didn't think we had the resources to make it sustainable, and because we don't have the resources to transport children, because that's a huge barrier for the students that we work with at Dillard. So being aware of that as well, and the fact that if you're looking at after-school programming, that requires staff and school resources as well. So you're asking, when you come in, asking for that, sometimes that seems overwhelming. If you can find ways to connect with things that the school is already doing, or being willing to start small to build the trust that you're going to be there and you're going to be able to do those things, I think that is helpful. But I'd be happy to talk with her more.
Great. I will connect you to after the webinar. So a question that I had that came up sort of in this last discussion point is what happens when you do get rejected? So Tamara was talking about, being ready and willing to have people say no. And so when you get that rejection, and I think this question, Tamara, you've probably seen more of this, just knowing a lot of churches than anybody else, but Ansel, I think you may have some wisdom to share on this as well. What are some things your church, we talked about sort of, so if you get rejected, going back and taking a look at what's happening internally, but if you've done the hard work of discerning and you go with open arms and you still get a big fat no, what are some ways that churches can channel that no, and where else can they look to use their readiness somewhere else in the community? Where can they feel useful?
Ansel, did you want to take that, or did you want me to take that?
You start us off. I'll piggyback.
Okay. My immediate thought was to, if you go to a school and you wanted to do an after-school program, for example, and they say no, my thought would be, why the after-school program? So what's the nugget that is actually at play? Is it an after-school program? Is it a mentoring relationship? Like Rebecca said earlier, it ended up being mentorship when they started with tutoring, and it turned into mentorship. So if there's a nugget of why the thing, why you wanted to give clothes, why you wanted to do a feeding program, whatever the thing was that you decided, this is a gift that we have to share, I would look for other places where that nugget could be demonstrated. Mm-hmm. And then start trying to build relationships with other organizations that could receive the nugget that you have. And then that might start to make you known in the community as the people that know how to do this thing. And then the school might actually come back and seek you out. So that if you start with why the thing that you decided to offer is often a place to then say, well, let's redirect that to this other thing that's happening in our community.
Yeah, I like that too. I also think, so the great philosopher Kenny Rogers, once said, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. I mean, there's also something to that, to say, well, if this failed, we of course need to ask why it failed, and if we know that the connection is such that we should either totally shift our focus on what we offer, it's misaligned with what the school actually needs, or there's something else there. I think we should also be reflective to the extent that maybe our capacity, our skill, our will, our time, our volunteerism be used in a different way to support kids. So, I mean, and trust me, I'm all about school community, school church partnerships. I also know that the conditions need to be right for things to happen, and the last thing you want is to damage your parish, your community in an unhealthy relationship. So I would just say that is not the ideal kind of approach. I don't mean to jump all the way to that, but it's something I think realistically to consider. If the rejection happens and is persistent, and there's reason to believe that the capacity that you have is probably better utilized in a different partnership beyond the school. So, again, I'm ceaselessly optimistic and would say try everything to make it happen. But that should be something to think of Kenny Rogers.
Yeah. I think that might also be an opportunity to go back to church and explore the advocacy option as well. If a school itself as an entity that you are nearby to or have a care for is not in a place where they're able to accept your help, it may be worthwhile to discern in the congregation if engaging in the bigger conversation in your community is a good place to put some of your time and get started in that way. Rebecca, I think this will be our last question, but this is mostly for you. One thing we haven't talked too much about is the aspect of your partnership where you work with other churches. But we have talked about how, other churches can give us more life, and opening our doors to other congregations can really grow the kingdom in a big way that we often forget about. But what are some of the challenges that you've encountered working with other parishes, and how do you navigate that, and how does the other congregation navigate that? What are some things to look out for if you approach another church, and what are some things that have worked for you for sort of finessing the relationship at the beginning? because congregations do things in different ways, like, as we all know.
Exactly. I think the biggest thing for me, and I was a bit of a transplant to the area, so I don't have a huge history, but learning some of the history of the congregations and some of the issues that have divided them in the past. I work, one of the congregation where I am based now is a historically Black congregation. And then the congregation where I began is a rather affluent congregation. And then the third one was kind of a schism congregation from 50 years ago. So there's history there, and there's a lot of people that are suspicious of each other for a variety of different reasons. And so being aware, even if not directly influenced by that, has been really important in that finding ways. I think when we work together, one of the things that we do every year is we host a luncheon, a back to school luncheon for all of the staff at Dillard Middle School, and we host it at one of the churches. And one of the things that when we were inviting other congregations to come alongside and help with that is we had to give each congregation, each group, kind of a specific thing that they could be kind of in charge of and be a part of that, because there is some territorialism and things. And so beginning to find ways to make things work and to appeal to the desire that everyone has to work together. Our bishop in particular has repeatedly talked about our need to work across other Episcopal congregations. It's one of the things that he told me prior to my ordination, was that a deacon's role is to be a minister of the broader church, not just one congregation. And so, and that service is one of the ways that congregations are able to get past some of those differences, because we can agree on the fact that this is an important thing to do and that we would like to be a part of it. And so we've seen these congregations come together in ways through our partnership that they haven't in decades. And so it's a really great thing to watch, but it is important to kind of be aware of some of the sensitive spots so that we don't, we don't play into, we don't end up with a lot of hurt feelings and things like that. So being aware of the history and being willing to find the people in each group, in each congregation, find the people that are passionate about the same things, and they tend to be able to pull people behind them and to lead people in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Ansel and Tamara. It's been wonderful. This has been really lively. It's been a really fun conversation. I feel like we could keep on going, but it's time for us to wrap up. This webinar has been produced with technical support from Julie Lytle, the Executive Director of Province 1, and we are grateful to her for her help. And finally, thank you to each and all of you for everything that you are doing in your communities. The work you are doing makes a difference in the lives of children and of all of us. And we thank you. God bless you and goodbye.